now be gone? It is not yet in your day. It was the nightingale and not the lark that pierced the fearful hollow of thine ear. Nightly she sings on yon pomegranate tree. Believe me, love, it was the nightingale.
It was the lark, the herald of the morn, no nightingale. Look, love, what envious streaks do lace the severing clouds in yonder east. Night's candle is burnt out, and jocund day stands tiptoe on the misty mountain tops. I must be gone and live, or stay and die.
Yon light is not daylight. I know it, It is some meteor that the sun exhales, to be to thee this night a torchbearer to light thee on thy way to Mantua. Therefore, stay yet. Thou needst not to be gone.
Let me be taken. Oh. Let me be put to death. I am content, so thou wilt have it so. I'll say, yon gray is not the morning's eye, 'tis but a pale reflex of Cynthia's brow. No, that is not the lark whose notes do beat the vaulty heaven so high above our heads. I have more care to stay than will to go. Come, death, and welcome. Juliet wills it so. Happiest, my love, let's talk. It is not day.
It is. It is. Hie, hence, begone, away. It is the lark that sings so out of tune, straining harsh discords and unpleasing sharps. Some say the lark makes sweet division. This doth not so, for she divideth thus. Some say the lark and loathed toad change eyes. Oh, now I would they had changed voices too, since arm from arm that voice doth us affray, hunting thee hence with hunts up to the day. Oh, now be gone. More light and light it grows.
More light and light, more dark and dark our woes.
Then, window, let day in, and let life out.
Farewell. Farewell. One kiss, and I'll descend.
Art thou gone so? Love, lord, husband, friend, I must hear from thee every day in the hour, for in a minute there are many days. Oh, by this count I shall be much in years ere I again behold my Romeo.
Farewell, I will omit no opportunity to convey my greetings, love, to thee.
Oh, thinkst thou we shall ever meet again?
I doubt it not. And all these woes shall serve as sweet discourses in our times to come.
Oh God, I have an ill divining soul. Methinks I see thee now that art below, as one dead in the bottom of a tomb. Either my eyesight fails, or thou look'st pale.
And trust me, love, in my eyes, so do you. Dry sorrow drinks our blood. Adieu. Adieu.
Oh, fortune! Fortune! All men call thee fickle. If thou art fickle, what dost thou with him that is renowned for faith? Be fickle, fortune, for then I hope thou wilt not keep him long, but send him back.
All right. I think everybody can come back on screen now, because it would be nice to be able to see everyone. So please join us. Then we'll jump back into their screen. And yes, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful job, you guys. I mean, you know, my feeling is that everything on Zoom is diminished. That's just my feeling, to be honest. But it is possible to render a performance, and it is what it is. This is a Zoom performance, and I think, the split screen was kind of interesting anyway, looking down, trying to look up. Took a bit of time to coordinate this. But hopefully we'll all be back and more people will be vaccinated. We'll be okay to gather and enjoy theater together again. And I thought in any event, it might be interesting to just, chat with the actors a little bit. I guess I'd like to maybe just show of hands how many of the teachers here ask their students to perform as part of the teaching process. That seems like most of you. Yeah, okay. And so you may have questions about how to elicit performances from high school kids in these very intimate scenes. I think about that a lot. I mean, what's always on my mind, I guess I'll just start, that she's 13. We know that. It's in the text, right? And, I just think about that age. Of course, people didn't live as long back then. So this was a time when we all know that we're thinking about marriage. Kind of insane when we think about 13-year-olds or when we were 13 or our kids. But, it's a tricky thing. It's tricky because to get this scene to work, I think you've got to get some of that young teen energy. And yet you need actors that can handle the language, at least when we're talking about putting up a performance that people are really going to pay a lot of money to see. So you're going to try to get, practically speaking, for a Shakespeare festival, you're going to try to get actors that are, that where you can get them to look that age, but they're not, right? It's just really hard to get a performance like that out of young teens. And our actors today are in their, I guess that's fair to say, kind of mid-20s, like around there. So what are your thoughts about playing this scene, Crystal and Kieran? Do you have particular ideas about it?
Well, yeah, it's funny. I love that I'm performing this during Educators Day because my first run-in with Romeo and Juliet was, of course, in the classroom, in English class in 9th grade. And it's funny, I was terrible at Shakespeare in high school. We did Romeo and Juliet and I failed my test and I failed it so poorly. And my English teacher was so kind and she really liked me. She was like, I'll give you a retake. And I was like, thank you so much. And then I bombed that one too. And for some reason I couldn't relate to Shakespeare back then in a way that clearly accessed me. And it wasn't until I got to grad school that I was introduced to Shakespeare, I guess, through my acting teachers. And then it just hit me in a whole new wave. And so I think this event is wonderful of how every student learns Shakespeare differently and opening up different avenues. I love this scene. I'm working on it. I love it. And so, yeah, I love that I've had renewed faith in Shakespeare and I found my entryway into it. It's a real blessing because I love Shakespeare and I couldn't imagine my life without it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, how about you?
I have actually a complete opposite experience. Because funny enough, I played Romeo when I was a junior in high school. And the only reason that I was able to do that is because I had an absolutely incredible and brilliant, not actually a teacher, it was extracurricularly, but it was a director who was amazing and made the text so relatable and fun to work with all of us, right? Because what it taught me back then is, I've kind of always loved the language. But, I think Shakespeare is renowned not only for his language, but also for the stories and the situations. And I think that it's so easy. I remember when I started learning Shakespeare and looking at it, it's so easy to get lost in the language and get totally daunted by it and feel like it's outside of us. But the situations, if we focus on them, are so human and so exciting. And so So yeah, it is really fun to come back to the scene now and play it many years later. And Eli's right. I had a very different energy when I was playing this in high school. There was a way too much making out, for sure. The director was like, "Go," and we were like, "Yeah, high school."
Oh my God.
It was terrible. It was absolutely terrible and disgusting. But yeah.
And there's a question here, Crystal, for you from Stephanie. Is there anything that your high school teacher could have done to help you to connect to Shakespeare, do you think? Now, looking back because I consider you a Shakespearean actress. I mean, Crystal plays leads in our theater. And I want to just say before one of the remarkable experiences that I've had at New Swan Shakespeare Festival, this is our theater I have in my background right here, is that we cast Crystal in leads. And there were kids, Asian kids were coming up to her in tears, young kids saying, "I never, ever thought I would see anyone that looked like you play Hermia in A Midsummer Night's Dream." I mean, she had groupies. She was gathering these kids around and they're all crying together. It was really that was an incredible experience for me and really taught me something. But that's a little preface anyway, because now you're an accomplished Shakespearean actress. But at the time, that could have turned, that high school experience might have turned you off, right? So would have there been a way that teacher could have helped you?
I don't know. I've thought about that many times when I've been in Shakespeare class or I've been in a play. That memory comes back to me quite frequently of how I could have maybe missed out on so many roles if I hadn't given it a second chance. The thing is, she was a fabulous teacher. She was empathetic, and she even had costumes. She had like these Shakespearean costumes that we put on, and we acted, and she had like these like plastic swords, and we did the scenes. And I don't know what it was. Maybe there was some cognitive dissonance of thinking that it was this other thing that wasn't made for me. Because I remember I was very shy and I never wanted to go up and act. There were, and I was a very boisterous, I wasn't acting at the time, but I was a very boisterous student. So they're always like, "Crystal, go put on this skirt and go do it." And I was like, "No, I don't want to." But then again, I struggled with my own identity and thinking I couldn't do the acting thing. So I don't know what it was. It just physically and mentally, it just wasn't penetrating, and it wasn't accessible to my brain at the moment. All this to say, she was a fabulous teacher, and maybe it was circumstantial. I don't know what it was. So I'm sorry, I don't have a better answer for you.
Well, that's okay. And maybe we just never know who we're affecting, right? Maybe she actually did affect you in ways that you don't fully realize or didn't. And, we have those students where we're just, it's like, I'm teaching a brick, right? But they could wind up being a great actor or a great scholar later in life. We never know what bells are going to go. I think in teaching, sometimes the bells go off 3 years later. At least that was the case for me in my MFA, which is much later. How about for you, Crystal? There's another. I'm sorry, Kieran. There's another question, which is for either of you. Were you intimidated by Shakespeare's language at all?
Always. 100%. Anytime I do any Shakespeare, it's
even now.
I now know that I have the skills and the toolbox to figure it out, but it's very daunting, especially when you're playing a lead. That's a lot of language, and you don't know what a lot of it means at first. It's a lot of work. But I think, and especially what helped me when I was much younger, is focusing. Once you figure out what you are saying, it's amazing. And I think focusing on that and like having no pretension around it, right? Because it's so easy to be like, "Oh, you don't get it," and I did that to myself a lot when I was younger. Like I should. But I think when you really unlock, when you help someone, because I've also taught Shakespeare a bit, when you help someone actually get the language, you can see it, right? And it unlocks something in them, and then it's exciting, and it's kind of flipped, because then they're focused on how beautiful the imagery is and all that. So yeah.
Yeah. I'd love to open this conversation up to techniques that that all of you use to open students up to the experience of acting a scene, because I do think we can agree that when you read a play, that's an experience. It can be a daunting experience, or one that might push people away from the language because it's harder to get it. But when you see it in 3 dimension, when you see it acted, something else happens to us, and we can say, "Oh, I like that scene." Or we can say, that scene really sucked. They didn't, but we have a feeling, we have an opinion about it, and it comes to life in certain ways. So I'd love to open this conversation up. I mean, I will just share a technique that I use when I'm teaching Shakespeare. I don't teach high school; I teach in college. I have so much respect for you teach. I have worked with high school kids, and I'm not very good at it. I don't think I was born with the patience or something that you need. But one of the things I'll ask my actors to do when they're working on a scene, like they're working on this scene, and I'll say, well, first of all, take it and just rewrite the scene, rewrite it in your own language. And that can be, I think, very helpful in terms of them getting inside the lines, the meanings of the lines. But the other assignment that I give is, I want you to bring in the scene 2 ways, 2 different ways. And we're not going to say which way is better, which way is right, that you nailed it on that. I try to avoid that. And they'll say, well, what do you mean? And I'll say, well, you could take it as a tragedy, you can take it as a comedy, or you can go really fast with it, or you can go really slow. You can play with different dynamics. You can play it one time, cast, gender appropriately, and then switch if you like. Mm. I love to have a Romeo and Juliet where we have 2 females, 2 males, the male playing Juliet, the female, so just kind of shaking things up and breaking whatever we would think would be the expectation, which is more like the way you just saw the scene. This is a more standard version of it. But are there other techniques that you all use when you're working with students? You can just kind of unmute, or questions, I guess. Yeah, Sarah?
One thing I like to tell students, just to get them both out of their heads and into their heads a little more, is I like to say Shakespeare is a Rorschach test. You're going to see what is important to you in it, and that is totally perfect and okay. So when we're doing Hamlet, for instance, I like to, as an activity, do Hamlet in 60 seconds. So they're in groups and they have to do the whole play in like a minute and choose which lines they think are the most important for each act. And it's really works well for them to finally see like which emotions mattered most to them when they read it, but also to kind of get, oh, that was the important emotion, or that was the important line, or that's what I need to put more emphasis on when I'm acting. So it works both ways, both for them to like understand the play a bit more, but also to like be a little loosey-goosey and act it out. Not so, at least with high schoolers, like, oh God, no one look at me. But it works.
That is so cool. I love that. That's a great idea. I also love the edited version. Like, I'd love to see the 1-minute Hamlets. And did you find when you did, that's a cool exercise. Did you find that there were certain lines that everybody chose, or certain moments?
Well, everyone likes to be a big ham with the Polonius lines and his death. Like, that's always in it, no matter what. Yeah. But it's so funny to say, like, some people, it's just the king in Hamlet in most scenes, and then sometimes it's just Gertrude, or sometimes it's just Ophelia the whole time. So it really, with the Rorschach thing, you just see like what they picked up on and what they thought was important because of that. So they're all different, but it's pretty fun to see. I think the one thing is they always go with A rat? What's that? A rat? And brevity is the soul of wit. Those were the two lines that always made it, no matter what.
Interesting. That's really cool. I was thinking, that's so inventive, and of course they have to read the whole play to be able to distill it, right? So it's a brilliant assignment. This play is so long. Yeah, all right, but what are the parts that you really like? And when we're doing shows, we edit as well. We don't do 4-hour productions. And I'm in a group of artistic directors now. Most artistic directors agree that you should try to get your plays up in about a couple hours. Like each half should be about an hour. So we're editing like mad. I mean, those scenes that we read, the servant scenes, those scenes are gone. I mean, they're really interesting, but they don't move the story forward, right? Anyone else have any particular techniques for acting with your students that work? That you can
I
think
know
of?
this is a weird one. I did theater camps a lot when I was younger. And there are blank scenes where it's just a bunch of lines. It's like one page and you have no idea who's talking to who. And I have my kids, before they act out scenes, decide the relationships, the location, and the problem.
Mm.
And they have to decide that. And then they act it out in front of the class. And the class, based off of how they act, have to decide what the relationship is and guess. Before I have them act out other things and like actually get up. And then they're just focused on how they talk to each other. So it's not like the physical embodiment side, it's just the voice side, which is actually more uncomfortable with them because of the difficulty of the language.
Right.
And they have fun because they're like, I don't know what they're talking about. I'm like, I don't know what they're talking about either. You get to do that. And then there's some very weird scenes, but there's some really fun ones. And it takes the physicality out. So then you can add that in later and lets them just do the voice side of stuff.
Oh, that's really interesting. Have you done that on Zoom as well?
I wish, but we were hybrid when I was teaching in Romeo and Juliet this year. So I had kids in front of me and kids at home. So I was a walking microphone. So we didn't get to do the scenes this year, but I'm excited to bring it back next year.
That's such an interesting exercise. Really interesting. I was thinking about another exercise I sometimes do. Again, I don't know how well this would work with teenagers, but I would take a scene, and I mean a short piece of a scene where it's 4 lines each, let's say, because sometimes it's nice to work for detail or to see that you can get detail rather than the longer I teach, the shorter the scenes I teach, frankly. I don't want a long scene that's not really memorized or not detailed. So anyway, short, and then assign it to everybody. So and they have to learn both, let's say in this case, both Romeo and the Juliet, and then you just mix and match and see what happens. I guess part of what I'm getting at is the idea that there isn't a right way to perform these scenes. And I'm looking for interesting wrinkles, things that happen between the actors and the energy. And if you just change a partner, and you're listening, it's going to change you. Wouldn't you say, Crystal and Kieran? I mean, that is the basis of acting, right? Or what we call interacting. Go ahead. Yeah.
I just love seeing I got to see this scene rehearsed at 1:00 and then see it again now. And it just makes such a difference to see really good actors with direction, even under the radical constraints that we're all here by Zoom, how much you were able to bring out in the text. When Romeo gets behind that couch and then he comes back and then both of them are in each other's arms and he tries to steal away while she's asleep when he hears the sound, and then splitting the screen and having us indoors and outdoors. I mean, it just astounds me how much can be put into, it was under 10 minutes, right? It's like
way under.
7 minutes of performance. And you brought out so much meaning there. And I teach that scene all the time, but I teach it as an English professor. So I really see it as like a lyric poem You got the lark and you got the nightingale, and you have these images. And, I get really we've got the pomegranate tree and the nightingale is from Ovid. And, I go deep into the imagery, but there's something about seeing it performed in a less academic mode where the emotionality and relationality and like you choreographed it. And like, how can you choreograph it on Zoom? Well, you did. So
Well,
I really find that, I know that doesn't help me with my teaching because I can't do that, but it makes me just so in awe of the power of theater to render legible what feels so distant and alienating for our students. Like our students would benefit so much from getting to see that little bit. Like that just opens that whole difficult passage up. It's like we have it now. It was great.
thanks for those kind words, Julia. It's easy to do, to direct a scene when you have, no, seriously, when you have really super talented actors. And this kind of thing is everything's a collaboration. So, I don't know how much you have to direct young students that don't have the kind of skill set that.
Right, of course.
So we may be talking apples and oranges. Like you may have to say, stand here and speak clearly, But I do find, so there's a lot. This is something I wanted to talk about a little bit. There's something to just keep in mind, which is to allow your student actors to find their voice, so that we're not prescribing a particular way of speaking Shakespeare. And yet, at least for this director, it's got to be articulated clearly enough that people can understand that it's a lark and not a lark. So it's a fine line, right? I feel like with Crystal and Kieran that we are hearing their voices. I know their voices, and we're hearing them. But they're also able, and this is a very high level of performance, to articulate thought and sound. And articulate sound follows articulate thought. Like when you're clear about what you're saying in your mind, you tend to speak clearly. They're able to do it without losing their authentic voice. But I would lean toward authentic voice over articulation kind of any day, because what you really want your students to feel is that they and their voice and their body are living in the scene. So it's something important to remember. And I often won't talk about articulation until 2 or 3 weeks into the rehearsal process. I just won't, because your brain can't think about living the role and being articulate all at the same time. You can kind of think one thing at a time. So I did give you guys that note, right? And they took it very well. There were certain lines that were just a little bit soft to my ear. So there's a lot to think about. Did you all have any questions or things you were wondering about that we could answer for you?
I have an addition actually. Because back to are there any tools? Piggybacking off of what you said, Eli, of like, make sure they find a way, like make them say it in their words. We did a really helpful exercise in grad school. We all had to read Julius Caesar, and me and my 7 actors, we sat in a circle, and our teacher said, okay, tell me what happened in your own words. And this might hurt English professors' hearts, but it was very helpful for us to connect to it. So my classmate was like, okay, so there's this dude named Julius Caesar, and he's the king of this land. And then he was like, popcorn over to you. And then I would be like, and this other dude is like super jealous of him and wants to kill him. And it was like putting it in my slang and how kids talk now. I was like, oh, that's what this play is about. Right. It just kind of took all the heavy heightened language, and I was like, oh. And then when I started doing that with all the plays, I was like, oh, this just happened in this country. They just overthrew that person. Then it modernized it and it made it so relatable to me. And then you start adding in the heightened language and you get it back there. But to sway it all the way back to how we talk, to be like this dude and then this guy, it was very helpful, and maybe that might be helpful to reaching teenagers. Just a thought.
That's really cool. Thank you for that thought. Oh, and there was a question, Kieran, for you, really, which was like, how did you pull off the split screen? And this really was Kieran and Crystal's idea, right? I'm not taking. I would love to take credit for that as director, but it wasn't my idea.
Well, yeah, we were rehearsing it before we even met with Eli, and we were like, okay, and we got to the part where Romeo he has descended from the balcony, right? And we were like, well, we can't do that right here. So we were like playing with different ideas, and then we got the idea to do it on a separate computer. And all we did is the door to the outside of the house is right there, and so we had a computer out there all set up, and I just like sprinted out there for those 2 seconds, turned on the camera, and there we were.
Yeah, it was cool. I mean, the trickiest thing, of course, in Zoom shows, we say in theater, your production is only as strong as your weakest actor. That's the way the line goes. But in a Zoom show, your show is only as strong as your weakest Wi-Fi connection. Right? And you're cursing all the time because people are, they're, I mean, don't get me started about Zoom shows. But anyways, I thought this seemed to me to be pretty cool. Like they start together, they separate. And then the only thing we had to do was get Crystal to look down and to her left, right? So she looks like she's looking down off the balcony, and Kieran to look up to his right. Of course, the first time they did it, they were looking in opposite directions. So they looked like they were in a completely different scene. But those are easy things to fix, right? Just turn and look the other way.
Anna has a question.
Sure.
She has her hand up.
Yeah, I was curious in communities such as, in our county, and we're definitely not unique, a large number of high school students, Spanish is their primary language. So you're throwing in Shakespeare with language that is already challenging. So I'm curious from the teachers, how do you kind of bridge that? Do you ever have the script totally in Spanish? Or, how do you deal with that language?
It's a great question. I'll jump in first, okay, because it's a great question segueing to a project that we're working on right now at New Swan, which is an international film festival featuring actors speaking Shakespeare in their first language or their native language. And these are monologues or little scenes that they chose. So we have one actor that's doing Caliban, and he does it first in English. The Isle is full of noises, that speech, if you know it, first in English. Then he takes each line and says it in English and then Spanish. And then he does the whole thing in Spanish. We have another actor that's doing a monologue in English, Spanish, and French. And we also have a Romeo and Juliet where the Romeo is Italian, like you would want to see, although he's a little bit older. He played it when he was younger. And the Juliet is Chinese. So, this is, I don't know, it's like, yes. And then there's the public theater Shakespeare project that's mixing English and Spanish. But I'm going to put in
And they've made that script available. So if you go to Romeo and Juliet, directed by Sahim Ali as a radio play, it is on the Public Theater's site. And it includes, I believe, a script that you can use in your classroom. And it moves between Spanish and English. And so when I taught Romeo and Juliet this past spring in my Shakespeare class, I gave the students the option of, they had to do soliloquies, record themselves doing soliloquies. And I gave them the option of doing the soliloquy in a language other than English. I did have one Spanish-speaking student take me up on that. And she did a really great job doing, I think she played Romeo doing the But Soft from Yonder Window break. So it was a different language, and she took the opposite gender, and it was very effective. So there are some really good resources out there, especially for this play in Spanish. But I'm wondering whether anyone has used these resources or, yeah, Sarah.
Beautiful. Yeah, it's a beautiful production.
Yeah, so similar to that question, Laura and I were both English teachers, but we also teach ELD. And one of the things that we have is we have no fear Shakespeare books when we teach, that one side is in the Old English, one is more modern. So when we're reading it aloud, I give them the option to read either side. And it's usually about 50-50. And I keep switching back, and there's usually no problems, even when we did it over Zoom.
Oh, that's a great idea.
Yeah, and then I also give the option of extra credit, kind of to Julia's point, and they can do it in any language they choose. And sometimes students take me up on that, which is great. I also have a few PDFs of some of the plays in Spanish. So for my EL students that are in my English 2 class, they can read along in that version as well, if they're lost, along with like quick act summaries, just so that they can read that as like a jumping off point, so that when we're reading as a class, they're not totally lost. So usually they can follow along, not always, depending on, you know, where they're at, but hopefully there's some tools to keep the learning going.
That's terrific. I just wanted to mention, with our international films, we're premiering 2 at a time. So the ones that I described to you aren't on our YouTube channel yet, but if you come in on Thursdays, you can see the next 2. So we have 2 Lady Macbeths right now that are up, because we started last Thursday. So there's 2. One is in English from Nigeria, and the other is in Serbian. You know, so I don't know if you have international students or folks that have another language and feel daunted. This could be valuable.
They're short. They're 5 minutes, like a monologue plus an interview. So they're extremely teachable. So I'm really looking forward to integrating these new resources into my teaching very much. I know I have a Susan Freeman. I'm going to put you on the spot because you were in the Shakespeare class that I designed.
I was.
And I'm very proud of the production notebook assignment, where the students are really treated as the producers and directors of a play. Would you mind just talking from the student and the teacher point of view about that?
Oh,
do you remember that?
I do. This was my first year teaching. So coming out of this year, my brain is a little bit fried.
Yeah.
I was finishing up my master's while I was starting my first year, and it was all during a pandemic. But I also have a theater background. I got my BFA in acting from the University of Cincinnati. And so I'm familiar with it, but revisiting it just for the love of it after all those years was so wonderful. And having that class was just such a reminder of how much I loved it and how I can bring that love into my classroom. We set, or in that project, oh my gosh, what was the play?
12th Night?
Yes. We did 12th Night. I set 12th Night at Burning Man. And we were just playing with like gender fluidity and things like that. And it was something that I'd never, coming from this, I went to a performing arts high school. I always had this theater background. It was always very traditional for me. I loved the language. I was not scared of the language. I loved the big emotions. I loved everything about it. But so it wasn't foreign to me. But going into my classroom now, I know that's not the case for my students. So stepping back in your class and kind of looking at it from another point of view and finding a way to use this language that I love and these stories that I love to break open my students' minds, not only that, but to break mine open as well, and to see it from a different perspective, to see these issues, the stories that I think are about love and romance because I fell in love with them when I was 14, are really about these much bigger issues. And it can be about both. It can be about, figuring out who you are while you're, fighting for a cause and finding your place in a community and falling in love. You can do all of these things, and each of my students is going to connect to something different. So it was a challenge. It was definitely a challenging project, but on the other side of it, I don't think I'll ever look at a Shakespeare play through a single lens ever again. I will always be looking for a different angle and trying to find a new entry point for every single student that's in my classroom.
Fantastic. I love that.
Wonderful.
What I like about it is it really does invite the students to, Burning Man, South Central LA, Mexico City, China. They can really come at the play and sort of envision it from this other place that they can then educate me and their peers about. So I find that very satisfying. Aaron McNellis, I know when my kids were at TVT, they did a project where each class did a different act of Hamlet or something. What's happening in your classrooms and at that school that you think is exciting right now?
Yeah, that was a senior project that I did not teach, but Dan Epstein did. But yeah, what he does, we're a pretty small school, so he can take his maybe 2 or 3 classes of seniors and divide them up into groups and assign each group an act. And they are of a single play, right? So Hamlet or Othello or something like that. And they are supposed to put their own spin on it. So each act has one might take place at Burning Man. One of my favorites ever was the Act 4 of Macbeth done as a summer camp, where instead of a hanky, it was a lanyard. And yeah, I definitely saw some brilliant work done by those students. And it also included the thing that somebody mentioned before of making choices about cutting down the acts, because they had to fit this. We did it over the course of sort of 2 lunch periods, and the whole school would be invited to come. So each act had to get down to about 10 minutes. So the students made the choices about how to cut them down, and then the students made the choices about how to interpret the act and how to choose a setting that would bring something out of the text. Yeah.
And are you teaching Shakespeare yourself as well, Aaron?
Yeah, I teach Romeo and Juliet to 9th graders, right? With 9th graders, I don't feel like I have the time to do what I would need to do to get them to actually be able to perform. We do a little bit of performing in class. But my big objective with them is getting them to using Romeo and Juliet as sort of a vehicle to get them to analyze word choice. Because that's one of my big things as a 9th grade teacher, is just getting past this happened and getting to the writer chose this word for a reason, right? Getting them past just translating the Shakespeare and into the connotations of specific words. So we dig real deep into Romeo's death speech, and ask the question about what is he feeling in this speech? Because actually there's a lot of emotion swirling around, and a lot of different sort of arguments you can construct about he's clearly not as happy to die as Juliet is. He's stalling, right? It's not a friendly drop, right? It's not a happy dagger. For him, he's talking about the ship crashing on the rocks and stuff like that. Yeah.
Nice.